Come in.
The Argument. Growing up on classic monsters, I hold dear the entire clan. This piece surrounds a friendly camping trip where egos loom large, and it was September 2010 when The Argument found its way into Litfest magazine. The campfire crackled, popping loud and thrusting a spark high into the air. Having a comet-like trail, the cherry red amber fast disappeared into the darkness before arching and coming back down, landing on the block shoe of the Frankenstein monster's right foot. Noticing immediate, heavy-lidded eyes flung open and fear invaded the green face. Hopping up off the log, he excitedly stomped. A dust cloud formed around his foot, and after a few stomps, saw the spark extinguished. For a few moments he stood there, said nothing, and after looking down at the foot twice, sat back down. Seated to the right, Dracula, white fangs reflecting bright campfire flickers, waited until Frank sat back down before grinning first and then bursting into a hearty laugh. Frank looked at him, but was quiet. Filled with blood, a martini glass balanced on the log alongside, and reaching for it, he laughed again, nudged the side of the glass, and it started to tumble. Like a lightning strike, with a hand having pointed fingernails, he snatched the glass back. Taking a sip, he acted like nothing had occurred, and when finished, red-smeared lips spoke with a heavy accent. "See, my friend, you're afraid of fire, and I am not, and that is what makes me the better classic monster." Sitting on the ground, leaning back against a stump, peering through sporadic campfire flames, Wolfman chimes in, voice deep, grouchy. "All baloney, Drax. That doesn't make you the better monster at all. Who ever heard of such nonsense? Everyone has a fear of fire, and with some more fearful than others. Every single one of us knows damn well fire can destroy, so let's get this straight right now and call fire a universal fear." Using both hairy hands, he brushed the hair hanging at the sides of his face back behind pointed ears and then leaned forward. With conceited yellow eyes, he stared back at the vampire. "Doesn't apply," his voice had grown cocky. Not far away, crouched beside a large block of gray granite, the black lagoon creature ignored the conversation, more concerned with staking two good-sized minnows on a straight roasting stick. Plunging the second fish, he gurgled once. "Shut up, fish lips. Nobody asked you," Wolfie blurted and looked over at the gilled man-like creature. The creature flapped his gills twice and gazed back with oversized black pupils. Wolfie continued, "We all know water is fire's worst enemy, and my vote says that gives you an unfair advantage." He raised a hand, shook a furry, jagged, nailed finger. "And besides, another thing, how many movies have you actually made? 2, maybe 3, tops? That pretty much sums it up, Mr. Fish Lips. Tosses you right out on your fin." He smiled wide, did a mini-how. "Now, just hold on there, Wolfie." Frank's voice was strained, labored, seemed to amplify in the surrounding dark. "That's not exactly fair now, is it?" His voice strengthened. "We are all well known, and if you took a poll of, let's say, 100 monster fans, even Gills would be on that list, depending upon age, of course." Finishing the drink, Drax set the glass aside and stood up. With both arms he reached out. The inside of the cape was a deep satin red, and he swirled it around himself. "Must admit, Frank's right. Age matters. This newfangled breed of movie monsters over the last 20 years or so, to be honest, has me feeling more than a little obsolete. Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers, to me, those guys make too much mess. Not the class act we are here. Yes, would need to distinguish age groups. Probably find the older generation selecting one of us, and the younger generation choosing one of them. Yes, would need to define classic first also." Nodding after each point Drax made, Gills waited until they ended before using a webbed hand to draw the loaded fish stick back away from the edge of the fire. Sliding the end fish off the tip of the stick, beaky black eyes glistened in the firelight as he looked back, seemingly unconcerned, He popped the little fish in his mouth and chewed. Dracula spoke again, eyes infusing red. We oldsters may be a fading breed, but we started it all, frightened from the silver screen. More importantly, first and foremost, we're colleagues, bonded together, none better than the other. This includes you too, Wolf. Don't you realize that we are all we have? Comrades? Friends? Wolfie nodded, turned toward Gills. Sorry, pal. The creature blinked once, his glare softened. He finished chewing the snack and after swallowing, slid the remaining fish off the tip of the stick, offered it to Wolfie. Repulsed more by the webbed hand than the fish, something he occasionally enjoyed, he leaned back, waved both paws. No thanks, pal. It's raw and bloody for me. Shrugging once, the creature cocked its head and ate the fish. I know one thing, Frank said, his neck bolts glistening in both the full moon and the fire, depending upon how you was looking at him. At least I can go out any time, which is more than I can say for you guys. Gills, you have to stay in the water. Wolfie, without a full moon you're nothing, and we all know what the sun does to you, Drax. And maybe that, my friends, is why I could be the better classic monster. Wolfie blurted back, his voice somewhat alarmed. Maybe so, Frank, but it won't stop the hordes of torches destined to give chase. And don't take this wrong, but you have an odor of death. Doesn't bother me, mind you, but trust me, it's there. And yes, while I also share fire fright, it is a silver bullet that concerns more. Never gave it much thought, Frank retorted. In that case, Drax jumped into the conversation. Your Achilles, Frank, is not being the brightest star in the sky. You may be strong, but are also slow and a bit dim-witted. Are you calling me stupid? Frank straightened his back. No, Frankie, not at all. We're discussing specifics, and even you will have to admit being slow allows being easily caught. Using a stiff finger, he pointed below Frank. Just look at those big feet. You certainly don't expect to run all that fast in those, do you? He turned the finger toward his own chest. I am stealth and fast, capable of mind control to easily influence. Transforming into a bat and flying away isn't a shabby trick either. Of course, there are certain shortcomings too. Being discovered in the casket sleeping and fully vulnerable, just like Wolfie's silver bullet, a wooden stake applies here. He poked his chest a couple times. Believe me, harbors just as much worry, and don't get me started on crosses. Would I like to watch just one sunset? Sure, but I can't, so count your blessings, my fellow friends. Count them well. Wolfie considered arguing speed and strength, but after realizing both had legitimate points, he stayed quiet, pondered how weak he felt on moony days off when he was a mere human. Without making a sound, the creature stood up and went to the edge of a nearby pond. Stepping over a rock and up onto another, he dove head first, and there was a splash. What's with him? Wolfie said, pointing a hairy thumb toward the dispersing centric ripples. All were silent, watching and waiting. A few minutes later, the creature came back out carrying a large fish. Dripping and nonchalant, he strolled back to the log and sat down. Gathering the stick, he loaded the fish and carefully rotated it over and over above bright coals at the fire pit edge. Frank smiled. You know, guys, I may be a bit thick, but Gil seems to have it all figured out. He's not arguing and simply enjoying the time. Unlike the three of us, he has no conflict at all. I mean, come on. We all have places cemented in horror history, and each is considered a classic. We obviously did something right and should be proud. We shouldn't be complaining. We should be embracing the visit, not arguing about this or that. So what if fire scares me? In a green-stitched finger, he pointed to Wolfie. And so what if a silver bullet scares you? Turning to Drax, he said, and the same goes for that wooden stake. So what? Who cares? Right now we're just friends visiting on a wonderful moonlit night. Lowering the finger, a large smile pursed across his face, and he added, kind of makes me happy. Unable to deny the sentiment, somewhat embarrassed, each glanced back at one another. There was a comfortable silence, and faces brightened, grew more jovial. Turning focus to the stick, Gil rotated a couple more times and removed it from the heat. With a dainty opaque fingernail, he dabbed at the side of the fish and began tearing away hunks, offering the pieces around. Each accepted, and they chewed in unison.